Hello, and welcome back to EBC High School. My name is Shawn Brown, principal here at EBC High School, and we're continuing with our virtual professional development. And for this professional development, we'll be focusing on Domain 2. And there's a song that came to mind that I think best describes what we're going to be talking about.
Trying to make him something, ain't no telling he'll do for the paper. Ain't no telling. Souffle, I'm straight, I stay, my plate, shot gate, I'm a smooth operator. I talk with my whip, that Quan driving make you feel some type of way. That custom brightly make you feel some type of way. I'm shining hard, deep young, we got me feeling some type of way. Easy cause my homies rich, you feel some type of way.
So the focus of Domain 2, the title is called Feel Some Kind of Way or Feel Some Type of Way. I didn't make up this phrase. Our students continuously tells me that I'm making them feel some type of way. And we're examining how to create a classroom environment that's nurturing and that helps our students to learn in the very best way. So the question that comes to mind is, what is the relative impact of creating an environment of respect and rapport, establishing a culture of learning, managing classroom procedures, managing student behavior, and organizing physical space on the educational outcomes of students at EBC High School? I know that's a lot. When you break it down, we're really looking at all of the different aspects of Domain 2 and how can those different independent variables impact the dependent variable, which is the educational outcomes of students. So again, if you read through Danielson's framework, you'll see that 2A talks about respect and rapport, 2B, culture of learning, 2C, managing classroom procedures, 2D, managing student behavior, and also organizing physical space. So we wanted to look at every aspect of Domain 2 and think about how we can use these different templates and the format and the framework specifically to help our students to create an environment that is engaging, that's nurturing, that makes our students feel welcomed and wanted in our classrooms. Now, as we enter into this very interesting phase, I would say, of education, we have to remember that our students are dealing with a lot as they come back into our classrooms. Our students have to cope with going back to school after struggling through a pandemic, something that none of us have ever gone through. A writer named Cedars Siana wrote in March 15, 2021, even though in-person learning is usually best for their physical and mental health overall, it could take a while for them to adapt back. And this is true for all of our students. A lot of our students are struggling with many different issues because of now being in person after being isolated for approximately 18, 19 months. Next, learning loss is really big for our students. A writer in the New York Times, Dana Goldstein, cites, students have missed homecomings, field trips, classes, while also handling anxiety and economic depravity. Now they must leap into the future with the school's help. And that's what we're doing. We're trying to catch students up after they've missed a year and a half of learning, and we have to fast forward to account for some of the learning loss that they've gone through. Next, there's teacher stress. Teachers are finding it very, very difficult to work in schools. A writer, again, from the Daily News or the New York Post, Matt Barnum, writes in June 2021, juggling acts that students and teachers have to face is extremely stressful. A large population of teachers have retired, according to a survey released on Tuesday. The feelings that they have start to add up. The survey found that rates of stress were higher amongst teachers than most other working adults throughout the entire pandemic. And then in the US News, it talks about the racial disparities that even take place while online. Now, I've had some experiences with my own children, and I've had to have some conversations with teachers based on the way that they interact with my students online and it persists. It's even gotten worse. The racial gaps that we see happening in schools were widened during the pandemic. So again, a lot of what we're talking about, if you're working in the DOE, if you're working in the Department of Education, you understand that this is happening every single day. So one, I want to really applaud all of the students and the teachers that are fighting through their challenges. And I also want to acknowledge that it is very, very difficult. But there are some solutions to some of the problems that we have that we're going to discuss. Also, violence in schools. I know everyone is talking about the amount of guns or knives or tasers that's being collected throughout the city as a result of students just kind of feeling afraid of some of the violence that's happening. And we're dealing with all of that simultaneously right now as we try our best to create an environment that is nurturing and an environment that is learning for our students. I'm sorry, in an environment that is conducive to learning for our students. So in thinking about a theoretical framework to guide my thoughts, I thought about emotional intelligence, something that was coined by Daniel Goleman in 1995. And here it states that emotional intelligence is a psychological theory, and it is the ability to perceive emotions, to assess, generate emotions, so as to assist thought, to understand emotions and emotional knowledge, and to be reflective and regulate your emotions to promote emotional and intellectual growth. And that's emotional intelligence. And for us as teachers, we have to ask ourselves, how do we stand in terms of our ability to control our own emotions, and also to be intelligent in the ways in which we impact, positively and negatively impact our students' emotional well-being. Next, it talks about some of the components of emotional intelligence. One, self-awareness, realizing how you're feeling and how someone's actions might make you feel. Next is self-regulation. It's the ability to control or redirect emotions that aren't healthy for a specific situation. Also thinking about your internal motivation. A passion to work for internal reasons that go beyond money and status, which are external rewards, such as an inner vision of what is important in life, a joy in doing something, a curiosity in learning, a flow that comes with being immersed in an activity. So you want to always ask yourself emotionally, what are your motivations? What's driving you to feel and think and do some of the things that you're doing while you're teaching in a classroom with students? Also, empathy. And this is just my personal opinion. Empathy, first let me start with the definition, is the ability to understand the emotional makeup of other people. And I feel like as teachers, we have to be careful about how narcissism and being into us are going through a lot. Some of us find it difficult to remove ourselves from the equation and just analyze what's going on with the student. So I think it's really important that we start to think about empathy as a way of increasing student outcomes through being emotionally intelligent, and just basic social skills. Next, I look at culturally relevant pedagogy, which was coined by Gloria Ladson-Billings in 1995. And there's many different components to culturally relevant pedagogy. We've been speaking about that for a little bit in our school. And just to give you a definition, it says culturally relevant pedagogy is a theoretical model that focuses on multiple aspects of student achievement and supports students to uphold their cultural identities. Culturally relevant pedagogy also calls for students to develop critical perspectives that challenge societal inequalities. And when you think about culture, I think it's challenging and it's overwhelming for some of us to admit that we have some biases. Admitting that you have a bias is just admitting that you're human and that you have been conditioned to function in a specific way in an American society that subconsciously and consciously teaches us how to deal with women, people of color, and people who have different sexual identities. That's not the norm or considered the norm. So Again, culture is accepting, respecting, and valuing another person's culture that might not be your own. And also acknowledging that the culture that we identify as the best probably isn't. And that's a longer conversation. Going further into culturally relevant pedagogy, there's culturally responsive teaching, which was coined by Geneva Gay. And here it states in 2000, and here it states, building on the work of Latin Billings, Geneva Gay developed a framework with a stronger focus on teacher strategies and practices. That is the doing of teaching. Gay coined the term culturally responsive teaching to define an approach that emphasizes using the cultural knowledge, prior experiences, frames of reference, and performance styles of ethnically diverse students to make learning encounters more relevant to the effective and to be effective for them. So again, here, as we look at culturally responsive teaching, it focuses on the student and changing our practices to make sure that the student feels comfortable, making sure that the materials, the content, everything that we're doing is catered around the student's culture. And for some teachers, is easier than others based on their lived experience, based on their exposure, based on their prior knowledge. For some teachers, a little bit more difficult. And for those teachers, I would do a lot of research into the communities in which you work in. Do a little history follow-up about the school that you're working in, some of the challenges they faced throughout the decades. And a great way to do that is to go into the community, be a part of the community. I always tell my teachers, don't just come into school, collect a check and leave. Stay around a little bit, enjoy a basketball game, go to a volleyball game, visit the local community centers, because then you get a chance to understand the culture, not just the racial culture, but the culture of the geographic setting in which you're in. For example, we're in Bushwick, Brooklyn. It's a very different place. And if you come to teach in Bushwick, it's really important. It's imperative that you do a little bit of research about the community that you work in, because it says something about you as an educator when you do so. So the data that we're going to be using is from the HSLS, which is the High School Longitudinal Study. It's a study that's been going on since approximately 2009, all the way up until 2021. And the data that we use from that data set can be used in so many different ways to analyze best practices and best structures to put in place to improve student outcomes. The data comes from the National Center for Educational Studies. You can look it up. There's a bunch of really cool information you can pull from that data set. For example, here it talks about the amount of students that will go into STEM fields. So now when we talk about the importance of women or our female students being in AP courses that is focused on math and science, you understand why. Because we want to change that narrative and we want to change their expectations about being a part of that. Another piece of information that I thought was interesting and I wanted to share with you guys. Here it says 20% of female students expect to have healthcare jobs at the age of 30, while only 4% of male students did. Again, on the other side, are we challenging our male students and female students to reimagine their roles in terms of their gender? And thinking about the ways that society has placed upon us toxic ways of looking at ourselves as men and as women, and rewriting that narrative through the courses and through what we expose them to in our schools. Next, when ninth graders were asked if they agreed that college was affordable, 1/4 disagreed. 2 years later, 1/3 of the same students disagreed. And, you know, for some students or for some educators or people who are in education who cite that students don't want to go to college, there's always an economic reason. I know for myself, growing up where I grew up, I definitely wanted to go to college, and I had a mom who kind of enforced it. But there were times that I struggled because I wanted to make money to help out in the household, and I couldn't afford it. Luckily, I was able to get some support. So we want to use data to drive our decisions. And here, this is for you guys who are into research, this is the model of analytical plan. And here, our dependent variable is the educational outcomes of students, their GPAs. And this is continuous, something that you couldn't find a lot of data on. The first domain that we're looking at is respect and rapport. Respect and rapport is subjective, depending on the generation you're in, your lived experience, your culture, your gender. But for all intensive purposes, this is a general definition of respect and rapport and what that means for our students, however you'd like to define it. A culture of learning, again, a very subjective title that means different things for different people. But a culture for learning talks about being in a classroom where learning is obviously a focus, demanded and expected in the classroom. It's a non-negotiable, and this is communicated from the teacher to students and eventually between students as well. Next, managing procedures and students. Again, when you're in a classroom, I've been an administrator for some time, you can step into a classroom and know when there's structures and procedures in place, and when a person is kind of teaching in a vacuum and there's no clear structure. And we're going to be looking at that as well. Next, physical space. This is a bit of a challenge because we have so many mandates because of COVID-19 in terms of spacing and masks. We can't necessarily group students the way that we'd like to. So physical space has been a challenge, but it is a focus in terms of our analytical plan and what we're looking at. I wanted to give you guys a few practicals. I think I spoke enough. Just wanted to give a few practicals and then we can start wrapping up. So practical application about creating a classroom environment that's nurturing and that's conducive to learning. One, start on day one. Kind of too late. We're in December right now, but there's nothing wrong with starting over. And as an educator, you have to go back and say, hey guys, we started off on the wrong foot. But in terms of classroom management and creating an environment that's conducive to learning, there's some changes that need to happen. We need to make sure that, we need to make sure that we are in our classrooms on time doing the things that we need to do. So you want to start on day one. Next, setting high expectations. 85% of communication is nonverbal. So the expectations that you have of students, they know subconsciously, and it's based on the expectation that you have of yourself. If a teacher is coming to work late, if you don't have lesson plans, if you're not modeling excellence in terms of setting high expectations, it doesn't really matter what you say. The students watch what you do. Again, I'll say that. That's a word. It doesn't really matter what you say. They're watching what you do. So the expectation that you have of yourself is the expectation you should have of students. If you hold yourself to a high expectation of excellence, then you should do the same with the students. Now, some teachers have trouble doing that. They want to be, you want to be careful. You don't want to offend anyone. But having high expectations is very important. Hold students accountable. I really want to talk about this. Somebody once told me, spoke my spirit, because when we're dealing with Black and brown children or special needs children or children who speak a different language, subconsciously, we don't expect that they're going to become Rhodes Scholars and Yale and Harvard. We don't. And we teach that way. And we need to be very careful about, when I say we, not me specifically, but sometimes as educators, we don't really see the possibilities in some of our students because of where they come from, because of their culture. So you have to hold students accountable. If you care about them, somebody said this also, education is freedom work. It's an amazing statement. You're preparing them and you're giving them tools that can change their lives. And you have to hold them accountable to the way that they behave and the way that they function in your classroom. Keep it simple. Sometimes we complicate what it means to have a classroom that is conducive to learning, to create an environment that's nurturing. We do too much and not enough of the most important thing. So you want to keep it simple. You want to have structures and systems that they can actually follow and is not complicated, right? Your reputation. Oh man, you can say all the right words, you can try to do all the right things, but if your reputation is that of a person who just picks on people or has a personal issue towards children or whatever it is, it's going to show in your classroom. Eventually it will. Also, you can sound like the harshest person on earth, but if the students know that you really love and care for them, they're going to respond accordingly. So that's something that you need to think about as well. The reputation that you build is very, very, very important. I wanted to show a video of what Domain 2 looks like in action, what it means to build healthy relationships with students in a very practical way.
And 2 or 3? All right, welcome. There's find your picture on the board, and then there's a number there, and then find your seat, okay? Can I see the hat real quick? Okay, bowls? Okay. But I don't want it in class though, okay? But it's a nice hat though. Hey, welcome. Guys, as you guys are coming in, please make sure that that is you, right? And there's a number that's by you, and then that's where you guys are gonna sit, okay? So that's the seating chart for today. Mr. Gomez? Yeah. All right, welcome. How you doing? How you doing? ¿Todo bien? Yeah. How we doing? ¿Qué pasó, muchacha? ¿Cómo andas? I was outside greeting students. I definitely was out there just trying to establish, build a relationship because I have never seen some of these students. So to say I really had no relationship. So I was just trying to find something, whether it was off their shirt, whether it was just something, just trying to connect with them, even just saying welcome. But I wanted them to feel safe, that this was a place I wanted them to be. And I was happy to be there with them. Okay, so real quick, there is a seating chart. Okay, always, there has to be, okay, right? Because it gives structure, because there's a reason where you're sitting. I made sure that looking at the math skills, that there's a strong in your group, that there's kids that struggle with math, and hopefully my kids that are that really are strong in their mathematics, it will help you. This is math 3, okay? So it's a little heavier, right? It's a lot more work. So I had the seating chart set because I noticed that is day 1, I think it gives me more of control. I think it's very important for the students to understand that even though this is our room, I am still responsible. I'm the main person there that I want to establish this learning environment. And yet,
so in closing, I think this is a great video. If you get the chance, I can upload it also to the school's website so you can take a look. But a couple of takeaways from the video itself. It was obvious that he cared about the students outside of the classroom. He was able to connect to pieces of clothing or music they like or arts or whatever it is. If you look at the video a little bit more, he gets a little bit vulnerable and he talks about his life and his family and so on and so forth. And for educators, in order to create a classroom environment that's conducive to learning and that's nurturing, a lot of the work happens outside the classroom. So a challenge I wanted to give you is start asking yourself, how much do you know about your children outside of the classroom? Who do they live with? Have they had any family members who've recently gotten sick from COVID-19 or passed away? Who are their friends? What kind of music do they listen to? Do they like Rich Homie Quan's? Feel some type of way? And I think when you show a genuine concern for students, the environment changes automatically in the classroom. They work harder, they know that you're sincere, and they feel great about going into your classroom. So again, this is just the beginning of us talking about Domain 2. I have another part that I'd like to share with you. And thank you for joining us here at EBC. I'll upload the information. And as I say all the time, at EBC, everybody counts. Have a great day.